the FAA, which is overseen by Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He's run it right into the ground with his diversity.
On DEI and the claims that you've made, are you saying this crash was somehow caused and the result of diversity hiring? And what evidence have you seen to support these claims?
It just could have been. We have a high standard. We've had a much higher standard than anybody else. And there are things where you have to go by brain power, you have to go by psychological quality, and psychological quality is a very important element of it. So we don't know, but we'll see. We're going to look into that, and we're going to see. But we want the brightest, the smartest, the sharpest. We want somebody that's psychologically superior, and that's what we're going to have. Yeah.
Mr. President, you have today blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistake. You then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't.
That footage is from the day after the tragic mid-air helicopter plane collision that killed 67 people a little over a week into Trump's second term. Trump blamed FAA diversity initiatives without evidence and before investigations had returned any information. Now, I'm not here to label Trump's comments as racist or attack him personally. If you saw my earlier video on DEI, you know my focus isn't on one politician or one party. Instead, I want to spotlight a centuries-old American playbook in politics, which is exploiting racial fear and biases to keep us distracted and to keep certain people in power. Here's a core idea. So politicians have long recognized that blaming social or economic problems on an other group grabs attention and stirs strong emotions, and DEI is just the latest wedge issue. To illustrate this, let's look at an example from the 1960s when President Lyndon B. Johnson spoke privately during the Civil Rights era.
If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you.
Johnson, the same president who signed landmark civil rights laws, understood that fueling racial resentments can overshadow real economic and social problems, keep people angry and divided over cultural differences, and they'll be less likely to question how power and money are actually distributed behind the scenes. Fast forward to the same era, President Richard Nixon capitalized on racial anxieties through what became known as the Southern Strategy. His campaign advisor, Kevin Phillips, directly explained that
the more Negroes who register as Democrats in the South, the sooner the Negrophobe whites will quit the Democrats and become Republicans. That's where the votes are.
this wasn't a secret plan kept from the public. It was a straightforward electoral strategy based on the understanding that playing on racial resentment would sway voters. Behind closed doors, Nixon hammered these points home with his inner circle. His chief of staff, H.R. Hadelman, wrote this in his diary in 1969 after meeting with President Nixon.
President emphasized that you have to face the fact that the whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to.
Later, Lee Atwater, a political advisor to Reagan and campaign manager for George H.W. Bush, described how politicians employing this strategy could subtly appeal to white racial grievances and anti-black sentiments without directly mentioning race.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites.
Did it work? Well, since 1964 and the implementation of civil rights protections, no Democratic presidential candidate has won a majority of the white vote. I'd argue that this realignment wasn't about improving anybody's life. As you heard Lee Atwater say,
all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites.
notice he did not say that whites will benefit more than blacks, only that they will get hurt less. Instead, it was about gaining and retaining power. Their priority was simply winning elections in order to have control over shaping policy and deciding funding priorities. It's a pattern that still influences party politics today, showing how effectively race can be wielded as a tool. But this playbook didn't just start with Nixon. Let's go even further back to Bacon's Rebellion in 1676. In colonial Virginia, poor white and black laborers united against the wealthy planter class, rebelling together because they shared common grievances. During this cross-racial alliance, the wealthy planters created a racial hierarchy, passing laws that permanently enslaved black laborers based explicitly on race, while offering minor advantages to poor whites. It didn't truly lift poor white people out of poverty, it simply gave them a group that was now beneath them on the social ladder. That racial division ensured the wealthy retained power and never faced a united uprising again. It allowed the wealthy elites to continue exploiting both poor white and enslaved black people, hoarding their wealth and preventing meaningful economic progress for the lower classes, regardless of race. The thread connecting Bacon's Rebellion, the Southern strategy, and Trump's DEI scapegoating is that fanning racial or cultural conflict keeps people from teaming up around shared economic concerns. If politicians keep us arguing over who's to blame for job shortages, crime, or tragedies like a plane crash, especially when the blame is pinned on diversity or those people not like me, we're less likely to question policies or the power structures that directly impact our paychecks, healthcare, or quality of life. So, why do politicians and their backers repeatedly lean on this playbook? Because it works as a distraction. Racial or cultural divisions tap deeply rooted anxieties and biases, dominating headlines and social media conversations. Meanwhile, with our attention diverted, critical policy decisions about taxes, corporate oversight, education funding, or labor rights often proceed unnoticed, yet these overlooked decisions profoundly influence whether people can afford housing, medical bills, or achieve basic economic security. When Trump blames diversity hires for a tragedy before we even have the facts, he's using a tried and true political move, redirecting frustration toward a group labeled as unqualified, undeserving, or dangerous. Whether you're pro Trump or anti Trump, the pattern remains the same. Pick a wedge issue, spark outrage, and rely on that emotional response to rally supporters or distract from other questions about leadership and policy. So, why should you care, even if you're not political? Well, because while the news jumps from one headline to the next, decisions quietly affecting your paycheck, rent, groceries, healthcare, taxes, and public services get made behind closed doors. When politicians focus us on wedge issues like blaming diversity for a plane crash, we're distracted from critical questions like who is influencing the safety standards protecting us? Who profits from cutbacks in public services? How do lobbyists shape policies impacting our cost of living? These aren't abstract questions, they directly affect your wallet, job security, and community. No matter your political affiliation, recognizing this tactic helps you spot when politicians use fear or anger to divert attention away from genuine discussions about economic fairness and who truly benefits from these policies. Hopefully, if you see broad societal issues being blamed on wokeness or DEI, you'll be able to recognize this old playbook: distract, divide, conquer. In my next video, I'll dive deeper into who profits from this chaos and distraction and how. Until then, stay informed, talk openly about issues beyond headlines, and always look past the initial blame game. Thanks for watching.